Up until a few generations ago, most of the hands-on skills we needed for survival and successful living were handed down from generation to generation by simple, direct instruction. For example, my great-grandfather would teach his son how to fix the roof when it leaked, how to deal with a car that broke down, and when and how to plant for the best crop. Then when that boy, my grandfather, grew up, he would teach those things to my father, who would come to teach me, and eventually I would teach my own kids. But over the last few generations, we have lost this tradition of instruction. We've come to expect our schools and universities to teach our kids everything they need to know. But they aren't. In fact, many of us who are now young fathers grew up not learning the practical skills of previous generations simply because they weren't passed on to us. And the problem doesn't stop with us. If we weren't taught those simple, life-sustaining skills, how are our kids going to learn them? There may even come a time when the very survival of our kids and grandkids depends on their practical knowledge of how to make things work, when the systems we have all come to depend upon just aren't there anymore. The responsibility of teaching the next generation now lies with me and with you. Regardless of how we ourselves were brought up, it's up to us to make sure our kids don't launch into adult life ill-equipped and unprepared. So what do we do if we don't have the skills that we believe our children should learn from us? I've been struggling with this question for 10 years. How am I going to ensure that the generations following mine will be equipped for what's ahead? I finally realized that for me, the answer was to look back. I'd like you to meet my grandfather on my mom's side, Thomas Ballantyne, or as I knew him, Grandpa Tom. Grandpa was born in the state of Wyoming in 1929. His early childhood was spent during the events and aftermath of the Great Depression. By the time I knew him, he had gained a wealth of practical knowledge gained from a lifetime of hard work during good and not so good times. Shortly before marrying Grandma Pauline, Grandpa went to work for his future in-laws' family logging operation. Later, he went on to work for the Weyerhaeuser Lumber Company. During his 35 years there, he learned everything there was to know about how to make and use lumber, from felling the trees to producing the final boards and sheet goods for construction and cabinetry. Grandpa loved hunting and fishing. He used to tell me stories of how he would drive out into the woods with his family and friends, set up their homemade hunting shack, and spend weeks hunting deer and elk. During his early years at Weyerhaeuser, Grandpa built a house for his growing family on the property he had purchased that overlooked Klamath Lake. I can really relate with this particular point in my Grandpa Tom's life. He was building a house, had a wife and 2 kids, and all the while was working a demanding full-time job. The first thing I remember learning from my grandpa was when he lifted an entire building all by himself when I was 5 years old. We had an old barn that had been settling into the ground, causing the lower portions of the walls to rot through. Using an old handyman jack, cement blocks, and a shovel, Grandpa lifted the entire structure one section at a time, eventually lifting the whole thing several inches. He then built a new foundation underneath it and repaired the damaged walls. Though I didn't realize it at the time, getting to see my grandpa do that did something amazing inside of me. It started me on a lifelong journey of learning how to do seemingly impossible things by creatively putting to use the things I had on hand. Over the years, Grandpa taught me how to catch and clean fish, how to use basic carpentry tools, and how to navigate and survive in the woods. He showed me how to build new buildings and remodel existing ones. He also encouraged me to take things apart and figure out how they work. Out of all the things I learned from him, only a handful of things were taught as a formal lesson. Most of the time, Grandpa would just show me how something worked or tell me a story about how he got out of a sticky situation in the woods. A few years before Grandpa Tom passed away, I got the opportunity to go through his garage. That was a place full of memories for me. This is where he had accumulated a lifetime worth of tools, hardware, and supplies. In fact, I now use many of the same tools that my grandpa used. He was a big believer in the value of high-quality, heavy-duty equipment. Because of that, I've really come to appreciate how long something can last if it's made right and taken care of. I remember Grandpa's garage as the place where his projects began and ended. the exciting building where his parts and tools were stored, and where so much of my inspiration and learning took place. Whenever I wanted to go have fun learning something, or be inspired by the crazy stories that Grandpa had lived through, I'd head out to Grandpa Tom's garage.